Outside it was raining. Not an impatient rain, a patient one. The kind that murmurs against the stones and tells you nothing at all. It ran from the eaves in thin ropes, filled the stone channel down the middle of the street, and slipped away into the dark at the edge of town. Forget the name of this place. It doesn't matter. All you need to know is that it was one of the last lanterns at the edge of the map. Beyond it the roads went on, and beyond the roads began a silence no one came back from. Lately, that silence had been growing. Once this had been a stopping place, caravans resting, traders haggling, horses watered at the trough. Now most of the windows were dark, and most of the doors were bolted twice over. Those who took the road did not return, and the more who failed to return, the tighter the ones who stayed locked their doors against the night. There was a fear in the air, unspoken but known to everyone. And yet, inside, behind these old oak walls, a fire was still burning. Can you hear it? The kindling crackles in the hearth, and now and then a spark climbs, hangs a moment, and dies. There is wood smoke in the room, the heavy smell of wet wool, the sourness of spilled ale, the sweet soot of melting tallow. The tables have gone dark with the years, worn glassy beneath 1,000 elbows. A single lantern sways from the beam, and the shadows sway with it, as though the whole room were breathing, slow and low. Behind the counter an old innkeeper wipes the same cup for the 10th time, not because there is nothing else to do, but because his hands shake when they are empty. It is a warm place, in the middle of a dark and dripping world, small and orange as a single cupped flame, the kind of place where a person wants to say, "One more night." Tonight 4 people will gather at that fire. Once they were as close as kin, close enough to walk into death for one another, close enough to trust their backs to each other with their eyes shut. Now they are 4 strangers, scattered to the 4 corners of the world, who have not sent so much as a single word to one another in years. And let me tell you something now, at the very beginning, because this is a riddle. Not everything you are told at this table tonight will be true. Everyone here has a face, and beneath it another. Everyone has a story they tell, and one they have buried. Who is guilty, who is wronged? That you will decide, with me, across this long night. I ask only one thing of you. If a moment comes when you think, "There, I have solved it," do not be too sure, because more often than not, it is exactly where we are most certain that we are most wrong. Everyone lives a hero's story, their own. Remember that as you come to meet them. So come a little closer to the fire. Put your feet up. The rain is a good sound, and the story is a long one. We begin. The first to arrive was Aldrich. When the door opened, the cold came in first. The wet breath of the rain that laid the candles flat for a moment and bent the fire. And then he came, a tall man, broad in the shoulder, who lowered his head to enter, because the door had not been built for men his size. He wore armor that had once been gilded and was now dull and dented, every piece marked by a battle, every notch by a year. You had to look closely to make out the crest on his chest. a faded falcon, wings spread, its paint long since run. The sword at his hip still carried a nobleman's grace in the hilt, worn silver wire, elegant even now, but the edge was nicked and chipped, an heirloom, and a wound at once. Once Aldrich Vane had been the name of a house with lands, with a banner, with a name that had run for generations. The Vane falcon had flown above 3 valleys, and every child born on that ground had known it. Now he was the last of that house, and most of that ground was in the hands of creditors. In the pack on his back, he carried a folded banner, its edges frayed, a banner he could no longer raise. In his pockets a ledger of unpaid debts, every page another shame, and on his finger a signet ring he could not quite bring himself to sell, because if he sold it, the house would truly die, and then he would not know what he was either. For Aldrich was hardly a man anymore. He was a name more than anything, and a tired man who spent himself to the last, keeping that name standing. He chose the table nearest the hearth, his back to the wall, his face to the door, the way a commander sits, a man who wants to know where danger will come from. The innkeeper came near, on shaking hands, and Aldrich asked not for wine, but for water. Not because he lacked the coin, but because he wanted his mind to stay clear. Then he waited, the firelight trembling in the deep lines of his face. And it was plain, from the set of his jaw, from the way his eyes tightened each time the door swung, that he did not much care for the thing that had been called to this night, or the ones who had. The second was already there, in fact. You might not have noticed her at first, at the dim table in the corner, behind the steam of a bowl of soup, sitting quietly. Morena. She had come before any summons, because this town, this region, this dying stretch of land, had been her burden for weeks. She had been fighting the rot that crept up from the roads, with the only thing she had, her 2 hands and her faith. She had sat beside the sick, wiped the brows of those who raved with fever, carried water bucket by bucket to the withering fields, and prayed over those who did not come home, even when she did not know their names. Only this evening, in a room upstairs, she had sat beside a child the rot had touched, and had not let go of its small hand until it slept. When she came back down, she was tired, the kind of tired that settles in the bones and does not lift with sleep. The hem of her robe was heavy with road mud and worse. Where she passed, she left behind the faint smell of crushed thyme, of scorched healing smoke, of the sweet weight of sickness. Her half-elven face was weary but soft, the kind of face a stranger wants to tell his troubles to. She had been the heart of the group once, its conscience, the one who stepped between them when it came to blows, who bound the wound, who hoped when no one else could. But every heart has its wound, and hers was this, of the beloved friend they had lost that night, the man they had all adored. She had loved him most, perhaps more than a friend, with something she could not even name to herself. And so for years, she had defended his memory most fiercely, and hated the man said to have killed him most of all. Keep that close, because you will need it. Love can blind even the sharpest eye. The face we love most is often the face we see least. The door opened again, and this time Aldrich lifted his head. What came in was a soaked courier boy, his breath short, his eyes wide. He whispered something to the innkeeper, and the whisper leapt from him to the men in the corner. A caravan had left by the North Road 3 days ago, and it should have come in tonight. It had not. Another caravan. The room fell quiet for a moment. Cups went down onto wood. Eyes turned to the fire. Everyone thought the same thing, and no one said it, because to say it would make it real. Marina closed her eyes, and her lips moved. One more prayer, for someone whose name she did not know. The third announced himself as he came. This time the door slammed, the hinges groaned, the wind threw in a handful of rain, and in walked Durgan, a mountain dwarf, short in height, but the kind whose presence fills a room. Armor scarred and notched across his back. At his belt a war hammer, forged by his own hand, the haft dark with sweat and years. There was still forged soot in his beard, braided and gathered with beads, and rainwater dripped from his soaked hair. He brought in with him cold air, wet stone and the sharp smell of beaten iron. He shook off the rain like a dog, kicked the door shut, looked around the room, a look that weighed everyone and approved of little, and started talking before he even sat. So it's true, he grumbled, his deep voice filling the space, looking at Aldrich. The great house of Vane, sunk low enough to throw its last coin at an adventure. Or why else are you here, Vane? Did you come for honor, or for your purse? Aldrich did not lift his eyes from his water. Sit down, Durgan. I'll sit, but I won't sit down from the truth. You know that much of me. He dragged a chair across the boards, and it complained under him. Then he noticed Marina in the corner, and his voice softened a notch. The softness did not suit him, did not sit right on him. Still praying over the dead, are you? Look to the living a while, girl. The dead can't hear you. I've tried. Durgan was the most dangerous kind of honest man. One who spoke his mind to your face, without fear, without flinching, without a glance at your title, or your coin, or your blade. To him metal did not lie. You beat it, you quench it, and what it is what comes out. And neither did he. He gave every man his due, full and exact, the loved and the unloved, the deserving and the not. Most people did not care for him, and that never troubled him at all. But honesty has a trap in it, one Durgan did not yet know, and that not knowing is one of the beating veins of this story. To be certain is not the same as to be right. The man who speaks loudest is not always the man who sees true. His wine came. He drank half in a swallow and dropped a name onto the table like something spat out. So long as they didn't call that wretch, the tiefling, Vale. His eyes went dark, and the firelight in them turned hard, turned to stone. I know a killer by his face. That night I saw his, with the blood of the best of us on it. I'll not forget it till I die, and if I do, let my eyes go blind. A silence fell on the table, a heavy one filled by the rain outside and the crackle of the hearth. Marina's hands closed in her lap, the knuckles gone white. Aldrich fixed his eyes on his water again and looked as if he might say something, and then let it go. Mark this moment, and mark Durgan's certain iron line. I know a killer by his face. Hold it, because this is a story everyone believes. And the story everyone believes, no matter how many believe it, is not always the truth. Just then, from the shadow beside the door, a voice came. Calm, measured, a voice that had spent a lifetime giving orders. No one had seen him enter. You are all here. Good. Then we can begin. The man walked into the firelight, and as he walked he became visible. Old, his hair gone grey and cropped short, his face a soldier's face, lined by years of discipline. His armour was flawless, not a stain, not a loose buckle, not a scratch. The kind of care only a man with nothing else to tend can give. He wore a house's colours, a tabard, an arm's crest on his chest. Not his own crest, but the crest of the master he carried. His sword and shield hung at his side, as if set there with a ruler. In one hand a sealed writ, and at his belt a heavy purse. And when that purse touched the table, it gave a full, weighted clink. The sound gold makes only when there is a great deal of it. That sound reached somewhere down the spine of everyone in the room. His name was Halvard, though they did not yet know it, and did not care. To them he was only the house's man, the prince's eye, the prince's ear, the prince's outstretched hand. A soldier whose whole life had passed under orders, never his own man, always the keen and faithful and unquestioning blade of another's will. He had not been at the ruin that night. He had no thread in the old, bloody reckoning between these people, and perhaps for that very reason, his was the one clean eye at that table, the one gaze the past had not bent. "My lord the prince," said Halvard. No warmth in the voice and no cold, only the flatness of a duty, "has called you for a task. The rot that spreads from that ruin is eating his caravans, his lands, his fortune. You heard of the caravan that did not come tonight. It is the 3rd this month. He seeks people to end this. And in all the land, there is one group that went into that ruin and came out alive." His eyes moved over them, slow, one by one, measuring. "It is you." "The reward?" asked Durgan, blunt, wiping his mouth. "Enough to change a life." Halvard paused, and the pause said more than the words. "And whatever you find in the ruin is yours. The prince said he has no eye on the gold. He wants only the plague ended." And the air in the room shifted. Something unseen drew taut, because the people at this table had once seen a true fortune in the depths of that ruin. Not the kind of the fairy tales, but a real one that shone in the light, that could be held in the hand. They knew the gold below was no rumour. They had seen it. They had held it, and every one of them had paid a price for that touching. And it was here, the moment the memory of that gleam fell across the table, that the first face of the mirror was set, because the thing that had ruined them once was exactly this. The lure of that treasure, the greed, that night, that flight, that blood. Life gives you the same test twice sometimes. Only the second time, you know more. Or you think you do. Which of the two it is, you learn only in the middle of the test. Waldrick was quiet a long while, then asked, careful, deliberate, "What do your records say Of that expedition, what do you know? Alvard opened the writ. The paper hissed in the low light, the red wax of the seal catching the fire. An expedition of 5, financed by the prince's house years ago. He lifted his head, and his eyes crossed the table once more, counting. But I see 3 before me. No one answered. Only the fire ticked, and outside the rain went on saying its one thing. 5 had gone down into that ruin years ago. That night, 1 died. The 5th, the beloved friend they all adored. 4 remained. But only 3 had come to this table. The 4th, the house had either failed to find or had not dared to call. And I will tell you this, because you will need it later, need it badly. That 5th who died, the beloved one, the mourned one, the one likened to a saint, was the cause of all this ruin. And no one at that table knew it. Neither do you, not yet. But I have planted the seed. Let it grow. The 5th is dead, said Durgan at last, heavy, each word brought down like a hammer. And the man who killed him is not at this table. Good thing too, because if he were, I would raise this hammer one last time. But he was wrong, and he had only seconds left before he learned it. The door opened a 4th time, and this time in silence. No slan, no gust, no groan of hinge. Only where a moment before the threshold had been empty, there was now a shape, and the warmth of the room, as if a hand had quietly been drawn back, withdrew. The fire still burned, the coal still glowed red, but somehow it no longer warmed. The innkeeper set down his cup. The man in the corner leaned a little drinks. Veil. Tall, thin, hooded. A cloak that had eaten years of the wild's cold and rain and loneliness. The hem still wet. The edges muddy. At his belt 2 daggers. The grips worn, but the blades, you could feel it, keen. In his boot the faint line of a hidden knife. Half his face was in the hood's shadow. The visible half was calm. Too calm. The kind of stillness people fear most, because stillness does not show what it hides. A tiefling's horns caught a dull red in the firelight, and his eyes, those were eyes that had seen a great deal, and wished they had seen less. Durgan shot to his feet, his chair going over, his hand at his hammer. You! Vel did not move. Vel's eyes moved slowly across the table. Aldrich, Marina, Durgan, and rested a moment on each, with the look of a man who knows them, but expects nothing from being known. The years had left their marks on those faces, and he saw that too and said nothing of it. At last he spoke. His voice was low, rough, like the hinge of a door long unused. They didn't call me, I know. No one calls me. He paused, and in that pause the edge of some old pain showed, vanished. But I knew they would call you. When that thing stirs below, the house gathers its old dogs. It always has. This is the nearest town. Where else would you have come? Then get out, said Durgan, the hammer still half raised. I couldn't either. Vel stood at the threshold and did not come in. He was not waiting for an invitation. He had learned long ago there would be none. He only had to be there. That thing below is waking. A little more each day, and I am the only one who can stop it. Because no one else knows what it is. I don't want this. For years I did everything I could not to come near that door again. And yet here I am. So it must be true. Now look at him closely. Everyone in the room sees a killer in him. A traitor, a liar, an ill omen out of the dark. A monster who cut down the best of a company in cold blood. The most obvious suspect. The easiest enemy. And perhaps you see him that way too. Because that is how he looks. And because I have shown him to you so. But let me leave you a question. And do not answer it, only carry it. Uncalled, caring nothing for the reward, having fled that door for years. What brought this man here tonight? Not gold, not revenge. Then what? What walks a man toward the very thing he fears most? Set it aside. Its answer will be waiting for you at the end. What we leave in the dark is often the one who holds the light. Marina rose, her chair sliding back, her soup gone cold and forgotten. On her face was all the grief she had carried for years, all of it at once. I will not sit at the same table as him, she said, her voice shaking, and furious at its own shaking. He killed Lucan, the man we all loved, the man who led us out of the dark. Do not make me sit with him, because I too might want once, just once, to try. I killed him, said Val, simply. No denial, no explanation, no defense, no plea. Only those two words, and behind them a great silence, the silence of something unsaid. And Halvard, the house's man, who until that moment had looked at these people as soldiers cold, pieces of a task, to be counted, managed, spent if need be, now looked for the first time, not at the table but at the ones around it. And he saw a killer, yes, but he also saw that the killer did not deny. Halvard had seen 100 interrogations in his life, 100 guilty men, and he had learned one thing. Guilty men explain, guilty men plead, invent reasons, weep, tear down heaven and earth to clear themselves. This man did none of it. He took the guilt up onto his back like an old weight. In silence, Halvard said nothing. He had nothing to say yet, but somewhere in him, some small place, a question formed, and sometimes a story, a great stone-heavy lie, begins to leak from just such a small crack. Outside, the rain still spoke, with the same patience. The fire was sinking, coal by coal, from orange to red. Tomorrow at first light, these 5 weary people, 4 estranged companions and the soldier who watched them, would go down into that ruin, and the thing they had buried for years would be waiting there, in the dark, patient. But tonight, only tonight, they were still at the fire, under a roof, dry and almost safe, and not one of them knew who or what was waiting below. Neither do you, not yet, but we will learn it together and keep this close as we go down into it. No one wakes in the morning meaning to do the wrong thing. Dawn came pale and silver after the rain. 4 people left through the town gate, not together, only in the same direction, an invisible distance between them, like a caravan in which each man carries his own solitude. And a fifth shadow came with them, Halvard, the house's man. It was a strange thing. The prince had left them everything they might find in the ruin, the gold, the jewels, all of it. So why was the house's man here at all? At Halvard's belt there was a second writ, sealed, and that writ said nothing of gold. What he was to secure, he did not himself quite know, only that he had been told to open it when they reached the heart of the circle. A soldier does not question, but a soldier does wonder. And that man's presence set one of them more on edge than the rest, Aldrich. Because Aldrich carried a secret, and that secret belonged to this very house. For now only see this. With each glance from the house's man, Aldrich's jaw tightened a little more, with the unease of a guilty man. Set that aside and ask yourself, is he the one hiding it? I want you to ask, because the finest thing about a riddle is the gentle way it nudges you toward the wrong door. The road ran through a dying land. The trees had withered, not green but grey, their leaves like paper that would crumble to dust at a touch. There was no birdsong, none at all, and that silence had a weight to it, a weight that filled the ears and set the nerves wrong. The ground was soft and damp underfoot, but it was not a healthy wetness. A smell had soaked into the air, sweetish and wrong, the smell of something rotting slowly. The rot had passed this way, and where it passed it had left no colour behind. Durgan, who could not abide silence, spoke first, to Aldrich. Don't walk so straight, Vane. We go for a prince's purse, not a temple. I answer to no one, said Aldrich, his eyes on the road. You don't, no. You just make someone else pay the bill. Durgan spat onto the grey earth. House child. Marina stepped between them, with a tired patience. Enough, both of you. Whatever waits for us below will show us soon enough that we cannot afford to be at each other's throats. And at the very back of the line, at the tail of the caravan, walked Vale, speaking to no one, but his eyes never stopped. They moved along the tree line, through the shadows, over every bend of the road. The eyes of a killer, you would think, or of a watchman. The two look the same, until the difference is the only thing that matters. Toward midday they came upon it, a way station, or what had been one. A low stone shelter, where travellers had once changed horses and warmed their hands. Now the roof had fallen in, and before it stood a wagon, a caravan wagon, its wheels sunk in the grey mud, its canvas torn and hanging. There were no bodies. That was the worst of it. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. Only a wagon stopped mid-road, as if the people had simply been lifted out of the world, between one step and the next. Marina touched the wood and closed her eyes. This is the one, she said quietly, the one that did not come. No one answered, but every hand moved a little closer to a weapon, and they walked on, faster now, and did not look back. The first attack came in the afternoon. They burst from between the withered trees without a sound. Things that had once been animals, now unmade by the rot. Their skins hung loose, their eyes milk white, their movements broken and wrong. That they came in silence was the worst of it, because danger does not shout. Danger comes softly and close. Durgan was the first to strike. The hammer drew a heavy arc through the air and laid one of the shapeless things down with a sound of bone and rotten wet. Aldrich drew his sword and set his back to Morena. By a reflex the years had taught him, Halvard lowered his spear with a soldier's calm and held the line. But one of them came from where Morena could not see, from the side in silence. And she did not have the time even to cry out. Vel was there. No one saw where he came from. One moment the space was empty. The next a shadow stood between Morena and the thing. The twin daggers flashed once, like a line drawn in fire, and the danger was over. Vel drew back in the same silence, and did not even look at her, as though the thought of waiting for thanks had never once crossed his mind. Morena held her breath. The man she hated had saved her life, and it did not make her hatred easier. It made it harder, because hatred should be a clean thing, a clear thing, and in that moment its clearness clouded. Halvard saw it, with a soldier's eye, unaccounting, unprejudiced, and this passed through him. You keep it too. This man does not fight to win. He fights to protect. A killer does not fight like that. A small thought, but small thoughts quietly hollow out the ground beneath great lies. When the fighting was done, something glinted beside one of the rot-touched carcasses. That carcass had once been a man, one of the travellers lost on these roads, its shape undone by the rot. Around its neck hung a small, cold medallion, the symbol of Lucan, because in this land the people still prayed to that radiant dead man, believing he had given his life trying to save them. They hung his mark about their necks for protection. Aldrich picked it up, turned it in his palm, looked closely, and there was something wrong with it. The symbol was crooked, like the shadow of a holy thing, imitating the true one. No one knew what it meant. Morena took it from Aldrich's hand, closed it in her fist and said nothing, but a shadow crossed her face, the first thin seed of a doubt. For if Lucan had been a saint, a hero, the man who died to save them, then why did his mark, worn for protection over the hearts of the dying, come out of the ground, twisted and wrong? She did not say it aloud, but she carried the medallion in her pocket the rest of the way, and her hand went to it again and again, the way a tongue goes to a sore tooth. That night they made camp an hour from the mouth of the ruin. A small fire, around it 5 silent faces, orange and flickering beneath the flame. Off in the dark, something that had once been a wolf howled, or a thing like a wolf. The warmth of the fire reached only an arm's length. Beyond it the cold of the night waited. The fireside is where people tell the truth, or the thing they take for the truth, and the talk turned as it had to that night, the 1 years ago. And here I want your attention, because 3 people remembered the same night, and all 3 remembered it differently. Morena spoke first, her voice low, her eyes in the flame. Lucan was reaching out his hand toward us. He was asking for help, and she could not look at Val. He cut that hand down. No, said Durgan, his brows drawn. He was not reaching. I saw Vale's face in that moment. There was something in it, a hunger, the face of a killer. I'll not forget it till I die. Aldrich said nothing. He looked into the fire, and you, listening closely, noticed his silence. Because Aldrich was not telling that night. He could not. Because that night his eyes had been elsewhere, on the place where the treasure lay. 3 people, 1 night, and 3 separate nights remembered. One says a hand reaching, one says a hungry face, one says nothing at all. Tell me, which is true? Perhaps none, perhaps each from its own corner, because human memory is not a witness. It is a storyteller, and every storyteller, without meaning to, makes himself the hero. Before you judge a man, ask what burden he had to carry. Vale at the far side of the fire corrected none of them. He only listened, and for a moment, only a moment, he seemed about to speak. His lips parted, and something he had carried for years rose to them. Then he closed them. He did what the years had taught him. He stayed silent. Why he stayed silent, you will one day learn. And when you learn it, this silence will weigh on you far more than it does now. That night the watch fell to Vale and to Halvard. The 2 men sat a long while by the reddening embers, without speaking. One a judge tiefling, the other a soldier who had spent his whole life under another man's command. Both in their own way, set outside. One for his blood, the other because he had never once been himself. At last Halvard, low, asked, "Why do you not defend yourself?" Vale did not answer for a long time. The last coal of the fire went dark. Then, who would believe a tiefling's word? I learned it years ago. Some truths spoken aloud only make themselves more impossible. Halvard weighed that, and thought of his own life. A life of orders obeyed, of questions never asked, of a voice that had never once spoken for itself. And for the first time he felt that small crack in him. I too, he thought, I too have never... No, he stopped himself, the way a man stops at the edge of a thing he is not ready to say. He said nothing aloud. Not yet. At first light they went down into the ruin, and the ruin was not what they had expected. You were waiting for a monster's den, weren't you? Bones, filth, the reek of a beast. But it was not that. It was of cold blue stone, cut clean, deliberate. The walls wet into the touch like ice. Every sound came back doubled, a footstep, a breath, returning long and low down the halls. They passed through a fallen entrance hall, and then a narrower gallery where black water had risen to the knee, cold enough to still the breath, their torches doubling on its still surface. And beyond it a chamber whose walls were carved, not with a battle, but with a rite. Circles, symbols, and, mark this, marks of sacrifice, scored and long dried, very old. This was no lair of a beast. This was a place where someone had been trying to do something. Durgan stopped before the carvings, and his forged faith smelled a wrong holiness. This is a temple, he said, his voice for the first time uncertain, but no temple of any clean god. And the official story, the story they had all believed for years, took its first crack there. Because if Lucan had been a saint, if he had been a hero, then what was he doing here, at the center of this ritual circle? No one asked the question aloud, but all of them thought it. And Morena, for the first time, touched the crooked medallion in her pocket with something that was almost fear. Then they found the treasure. A great chamber filled to the ceiling, gold, silver, jewels, the forgotten wealth of an older age. The torchlight broke into 1,000 pieces there, scattering the walls with trembling flecks of gold. Enough to change a life, Albert had said, and there it was before their eyes, close enough to touch. And greed, like an old friend, quietly returned. Aldrich's eyes lit. His house, his name, everything he had lost made possible again in this one room. Even Durgan paused a moment. Halvard did not so much as look at the gold. That was not his order. His order lay deeper, and the thought of that sealed writ at his belt made him, for the first time, uneasy. But the true bait was not the gold. Deeper down, further in, there was something else, and it had begun to wake. A power, and that power whispered to each of them in a different voice, in the voice of the thing they most wanted. Aldrich heard his own voice. Your house can rise again. Your lands, your banner, your name. Only reach out and take. Morena heard a voice, and that voice, her breath caught, was Lucan's. You can bring me back. The dead can return. Only believe. Durgan heard a voice. You will never be wrong again. You will see every lie, know every truth. Certainty, absolute. Only reach. And Halvard, the soldier who had never been himself, heard the cruelest voice of all. You could be your own man for the first time, with no one's order upon you. A life, your life. Only reach. Each of them heard the deepest longing of his own mask, and to resist that whisper, that was the beginning of letting the mask fall. But to one of them, the whisper never came at all. Mark it, for it is a clue. Vale heard nothing. The power could find nothing to offer him, because Vale wanted nothing. Not gold, not a name, not the past, not a future, only to end this. And a man who wants nothing is either a saint or a man who has already lost everything. Which was Vale? Set that aside too. And then the breaking point. Aldrich took a step toward the gold or toward the whisper. His hand was trembling, and Vale caught him by the wrist, hard. Don't touch it. It isn't gold. It's bait. What's it to you? Aldrich snapped, the panic of the whisper in his voice. Why do you always want what's deeper down, killer? What are you after down there? Do you see the trap? Vale was protecting them from that power, but his protecting looked like guilt. The man doing the most right thing stands as if in the most wrong place. The whole weave of this story is hidden in that single moment. And it was there, in the middle of that fracture, that the second attack came. The guardians of the ritual place, things hewn from stone, from rot, from death, rose out of the dark. And this time the fight was not easy. Durgan took a blow and went down onto one knee, his hammer ringing on the stone. Aldrich felt one thing, but left his back open, and a claw tore through his armor. The blood came, dark and hot in the dark. Real cost, real danger. Death was no longer a thing spoken of. It was in the room now, breathing with them. But something had changed. These five, so scattered in the first attack, so out of step, now without a word, without anyone deciding it, they found a rhythm. When Durgan fell, Halvard stepped before him. Vel watched the flanks. Morena poured her healing into Aldrich's wound, and beneath her hands the wound warmed and closed. Years ago they had been a company. The muscles remembered even if the hearts did not, yet. When the last of the things went down, they stood breathless, bloodied but standing, a little stronger, a little more, together. And after the fight, in that fragile quiet where wounds abound, the truth spilled out. Aldrich, holding the gash on his arm, set his back to the cold stone and looked at Halvard, the house's man. Then with the honesty that exhaustion and pain drag out of a man, he spoke. That night I took the treasure. As we fled, you were all looking at Lucan. I looked at the gold. I took it and hid it, and my house breathed one more year on it. He shut his eyes, and that treasure belonged to this house. So, he turned to Halvard. The man you ought to hang is me, not Vel. And here you are about to say, "There, I have it." So the real guilty man is Aldrich. He was the one hiding it. But remember what I told you, where you are most certain. Aldrich is a thief, yes. A guilty man, yes. But this is the small crime of that night. The true thing still waits below in the dark for you. Aldrich's confession is only a cloth thrown over that truth. Durgan, honest Durgan, looked at Aldrich and did an unexpected thing. He gave him his due. You're a thief, but at least you're man enough to carry your own thieving. That's more than most. Then hard. But it does not clear Vel. He is a killer still. And Halvard, the house's man, the prince's sworn soldier, had heard the confession. His duty was to report a thief. For years he would have done it without a thought. But he did not. He only looked at Aldrich a long while and said nothing. The second crack, and this time it was wider. They went down to the deepest place, and there in the heart of the ritual, something was waiting for them. Not quite a presence, a remnant, a memory, a dim radiance hanging in the air, trembling at the center of a broken circle. And within that radiance, a familiar face began to form. Lucan, the beloved friend, the fallen hero. Or so they had believed. Morena caught a cry in her throat. Durgan raised his hammer, and Vel stepped forward. With the weight of years, and his lips parted, he came for the first time, this close to speaking the truth he had carried so long. But the whisper of the circle rose. The radiance flared and the moment passed. Vel fell silent again. Not yet. Not yet. We are near now. Tomorrow, in the last act of this story, everything that dark room has hidden will come into the light. Who lied? Who stayed silent? And what truly sleeps behind that beloved face? But for now, only for now, the radiance dims. The shadows lengthen, and these 5 weary people do not yet know how heavy the truth waiting below will be. The heaviest lies sleep behind the faces we love most. The radiance at the center of the circle rose, and within it that night came alive again, not like a memory, but like a scene carved out of light on stone. And what they saw tore the story they had all believed for years to pieces. Lucan was there that night, at the very center of this circle. But he was not a pleading victim. His arms were spread, and he was completing a rite. And the thing that rite required, you can guess it now, was his own companions. 5 friends had gone down for a treasure, but Lucan had not brought them for the treasure. He had brought them to the circle. He meant to sacrifice them. Their love, their trust, all of it, saved up for that one moment. The reaching hand had not been a call for help. It was the last gesture of a spell. And Vale, the man they none of them trusted, saw the truth at the final instant. He had no time to tell them, no words to make them believe, and he did the only thing he could. He stopped him. He saved them all. And then, with a friend's blood upon him, he was branded a killer. Because who would believe a tiefling saying, "I saved you"? The radiance dimmed, and in the room only the sound of breathing remained. Every small clue now settled, one by one, into its place. Morena's reaching hand had been a spell. The hungry face Durgan saw had not been a killer's, but the face of a man in horror. The twisted medallion was Lucan's true face, and the thing Vel had stayed silent about all these years was this. The beloved was the deceiver. The one they took for the dark one was the one who held the light. Morena sank to her knees. The man she had loved for years and mourned and defended was a lie. And the man she had hated for years had saved all their lives. Durgan did not move, but on his face, for the first time in his life, you could see certainty crack. "I know a killer by his face," he had said, and he had been wrong, exactly where he was most certain. Sometimes one man's betrayal is another man's deliverance. But the truth had one more layer, and it was Halvard who opened it. He remembered the sealed writ at his belt, the one he was told to open at the heart. With a shaking hand he broke the wax and read, and his face went white, because the prince's true order was not to stop the rot. What the prince wanted was the power below. The house had not financed that first expedition by chance. It had financed it to seize this power, and Lucan, the beloved friend, had been in part the house's own instrument. That right had been for this power. When Vel stopped Lucan, the house lost its tool. The power began to leak. The rot spread. And now the prince had sent the same survivors back, not to end the plague, but to take that power for the house from the core. This was Halvard's secret order. Secure the power. The group was expendable. A man who had obeyed orders his whole life stood there with the darkest order of his life in his hand, and in him, that small crack from the camp quietly became a chasm. There was only one way to end the rot, to destroy once and for all the power at the core of the circle. But that power was the very thing the prince had sent them to take, and all the promised treasure was bound to it. To destroy it meant to give up both the gold and the thing the prince most wanted. The bait that had ruined them once, now far greater, a power, stood before them again, and this time they had to refuse it. And Aldrich, the man who wanted the gold most, the man for whom it meant his house restored, took the first step. He reached out. No, not to take, to break. The hand that needed it most became the hand that let it go. That is what atonement is. To set down because it is right, the very thing you want most. And as the core began to crack, they knew what it made of them. They had denied a prince his prize, and a man like that does not leave such people alive. And here, for the first time, and the last in all of this story, I take the die out from behind the screen and set it upon the table, because the moment I am about to tell you is the one where the die truly turns. As the core began to break, it loosed something like a scream, and with the final blow it reached for a life. Morena, the nearest to the circle, the most open to the dark's tongue. They were an instant from losing her, and in that instant, Vel threw himself between Morena and death, just as he had on the road, but this time paying the price. The dark found him, and at the same instant came Halvard's crossroad. His order was in his hand: secure the power, do not interfere, stop them if you must. A lifetime he would have carried it out without a thought. But this time, for the first time, he spoke with his own voice, and that voice said no. He let the order fall to the ground and ran to Vel and Morena. He chose to become himself by saving a man who had lost himself. And the die turned. Vel's life hung on a knife's edge, between two ends, to live or to die a second and final time for these friends. The die rolled slowly and turned and came to rest. By the width of a single breath, it held. Vel lived, but barely, senseless, drawn back from the very lip of death. The core scattered, the light went out, and the heart of the rot, after all these years, fell silent. They carried him in their arms, up from the deep, out of the dark, and into the silver dawn, all the way to the town. The road was long and silent. No one spoke. They only listened to Vel's faint breath, as if, should that breath stop, all of them would stop with it. In the town they laid him on a healer's bed, senseless, pale, and the hand that healed him, mark this, was Morena's, the man she had believed for years to be the killer of the one she loved. She called back to life with her own two hands. Sometimes forgiveness is not a sentence spoken. It is a pair of hands, choosing to heal a body they had hated. When Vel opened his eyes, the four of them were around him. No one embraced him at once. Years do not wash away in a moment, and some wounds take longer to heal than they took to open. But something in that quiet room had already changed. The distance was still there, but it was no longer a wall. It was only a road, and they had begun to walk it. It was Durgan who stepped forward, honest Durgan, who had given every man his due all his life, and had stayed in the debt of only one. And he said the hardest sentence he had ever had to say. I gave every man his due, he began, and his voice caught save you. He looked at Vel, at the tiefling he had branded a killer. And I owe you the most. For a man who prided himself on giving every soul its fair measure, to learn he had denied the fairest one his due, that was his reckoning and his release. And that day, for the first time, they called the house's man by his name, Halvard. Not a function, a man. He had spent a lifetime as another's blade, and in one choice, in one broken oath, he had become his own. And the strange thing, the thing that made his eyes sting, was that no one had ordered him to. He had simply, at last, chosen. But one shadow remained, the prince. They had destroyed the power, undone the house's design, and now they knew that design. A prince does not leave alive the people who carry such a secret. To bury his part in it, he would silence them. But what they had carried up out of that ruin was not gold, it was a truth. Halvard's broken seal, the very order he had opened, was proof, black on white, that bound the house to Lucan's right, to the deaths, to the rot. And the strongest link of all was Halvard himself, the prince's own sworn man, now their witness. That was leverage enough to force a prince to look away, to pay what he had promised, and to keep his silence forever. In a story that hidden truths had torn apart, the thing that saved them in the end was also a truth. Because a truth, once it is out, cuts in the hand of whoever holds it. And this time, they were the ones holding it. And they went back to where it had all begun. The same town, the same tavern, the same old oak walls, the same hearth. Outside the rain had stopped. Inside the fire was burning again. They sat at that table, the table where at the start they had sat cold and hostile as enemies. But it was not the same table anymore. It was warm and it was full, and one chair, no longer empty, was Vale's. Someone spoke of an old adventure, and someone laughed. The way people who have not laughed in a very long time are startled by the sound of their own laughter. The same hearth, the same table, but not the same men. And if you had been at the door that first night, and again now, you would hardly believe they were the same five. That is what a single true thing, spoken at last, can do to people. It does not only tear down, sometimes it also builds. The fire sank slowly, coal by coal. The talk thinned, the voices softened, and one by one they withdrew to the little rooms above that tavern. Tired bodies, hearts that had at last set down the weight of years. The doors closed gently. In the hearth the last coal lost its red, from an orange to a grey, and then to dark. And outside, beneath a sky that had finally cleared, a single bird, for the first time in a very long while, sang one note. Do you remember, at the start of this road, there was no birdsong at all? The land is beginning to heal, and in that old, tired, and now peaceful tavern, everyone fell asleep. You may fall asleep now too. The rain has stopped. The fire has gone out. The story is finished. Good night.